Ash, welcome to the Profit Podcast. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Um, you come highly recommended from a colleague of mine, and we're going to talk about all things movement today, which we've had guests talk about this in the past, but it's just such an important topic for personal trainers to get right. One of the things I sent across to you is to understand maybe what they can and can't do. I think that's so important to work to their skill level as well. But for the benefit of the listeners, let's start with a brief background on yourself, what you currently do, your career journey, and what made you go into movement and performance specialization.
Sure. My name's Ash Grossmann. I'm the founder of a company called The Training Stimulus, where we educate personal trainers and manual therapists in movement mechanics, how to assess and train their clients to move better in a lot of detail. So how did I get here? I actually started my career as a management consultant, working in London in finance. And the reason I switched careers was basically to scratch my own itch. I had a recurring neck and shoulder injury from playing rugby when I was a teenager. And it was never that bad, which I think is part of the insidious nature of these injuries, in that it didn't end my career, but I just went through this injury rehab cycle for 10 years on and off, where I would basically get spasm in my trap and wouldn't be able to turn my head right for a couple of days after a game if I made loads of tackles. And I would go and see the physio. I would get every treatment under the sun, acupuncture, massage, ultrasound, everything. And I would get some relief. It would feel better. I would do my exercises, do my stretches, but the issue just kept reoccurring. And it was never so bad that I really stopped to question what was going on, because, after a bit of treatment, I'd be back playing again. But if I had a game where I made loads of tackles, I started pressing heavy weights overhead, it would just keep coming back. And it never felt right in that 10 years. And it was when I was working in my corporate job that I was reflecting on it. I think I would go to the physio at lunch, do my exercises, and it still wasn't feeling quite right. So I just started to think, this isn't working. This isn't actually addressing the issue here. I'm just papering over the cracks. So while I was doing that job and not actually doing the job, I would just be on the internet, reading as much as I could. I did biology and biomechanics at uni, so I always had a strong interest in training, sport, and exercise as well. And I just went down the rabbit hole trying to learn everything I could about how to deal with these sorts of injuries. And that's when I first came across the idea of functional training rather than bodybuilding, training for performance rather than aesthetics, and CrossFit and mobility training. And I basically started to realize that there's this whole body of knowledge out there about how to get the body moving better, that wasn't widely available. So after doing a lot of research and studying into all this stuff, I basically thought, there's enough here to make a career out of this. I think that there's going to be enough people like me who've had similar frustrations, who love sport and exercise, but are unable to return to performing at the level they want because of some sort of biomechanical issue. So that started, the journey of studying to try and understand it in as much detail as I could, so that I could sort my own issue out, but also try to make the knowledge more available so that other people like me could benefit from that knowledge. So flash forward 8 years now, and I teach that sort of stuff to help other coaches and therapists apply it to their clients' benefit.
That's awesome. I wonder what the percentage of people is that initially started to fix themselves that get into our industry. It's such a huge turning point for people sometimes when they see the results on themselves. And so when you first started to teach this, were you working privately with clients? Is that what you were doing? So one-on-one or?
Exactly. So I basically started working in fitness always with the view to work in this space. So always looking to work with people who had niggles and injuries, as well as having training goals. I think that's the key part for me, is that some people with injuries don't care about training. They just want somebody else to fix them.
Yeah.
And this is this is probably why I've gravitated towards CrossFit, is because CrossFitters all want to do work. They're willing to put in the extra mobility work or whatever they need to do to be better. And I think that's the reality of the human body, is that if you want it to move better, it takes work from the athlete. You can't just go and see somebody who waves a magic wand and sorts you out. You have to put in the time and the reps to teach your body to move better. Nobody else can do it for you. So I can only work with somebody who's willing to do work on their own. So I think this is a big distinction from the classic healthcare approach of you go and see your therapist and they treat you and you expect things to get better because of the treatment. Whereas actually the ownership needs to be on the individual to sort themselves out. So that's sort of how I found my population of people who love sport and exercise and are willing to put in work. Those are the people that get the results out of this style of training. And through doing that, just in the gyms that I worked at, other personal trainers would start to ask me how I learned what I learned and how it all works. And a couple of trainers asked me to start mentoring them. So I always had that team that just grew. More and more people like it under this, and like about empower to be able to fix people where my mentee send me their win. Take for domestic clients, set out pain now without me the individual.
Just from listening to your bad, really work hard on the study, the research, the academic side of things, but you also were conscious of taking people on who would do the work.
Yeah.
So that's got to be communicated across in the right way to get the right types of clients, which we always say the same things to personal trainers is not having the tools is great, but you've got to communicate that in the right way. So it sounds like you were kind of really good at getting the right people in who were going to do the work to then get the results, to then start to build your business up.
Exactly, over time. So that's something I definitely did learn in the early days. Is a lot of my clients are personal trainers and coaches themselves, and they'll often refer their clients to me once they've worked with me because they see the benefit. But in the early days, their clients might come to me expecting me to be that therapist who will just sort them out, and they're almost surprised to then get some homework, some exercises that they have to go and do. And there are definitely a couple of clients in the early days where I didn't do that communication piece very well, or maybe the referral didn't do the communication piece very well. They're like, go and see Ash, he'll sort you out, rather than go and see Ash, he'll teach you how to sort yourself out, which is the key distinction. And so that's probably why, like I say, I've nestled into CrossFit, because as a population overall, CrossFitters tend to love putting in the extra work and see that as part of being a good athlete.
Yeah, and they definitely do. They definitely put the work in.
They do. Can I just jump in quickly? I'm just wondering, Ash, when you first started doing this type of work and it got noticed by other trainers, what do you think they were noticing in terms of what was different with what you were doing with people versus what they were potentially doing? What potentially were the things that they picked up on that they saw you doing? Was it that you were doing assessments with people? Was it the type of training you were doing, the style of training? Like, I'd just be interested to know. I think the listeners would be as well. Like, what did it look like from the outside looking in terms of differences from a typical PT?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I used to work at Gymbox Farringdon, which is one of the biggest gyms in Europe. It's massive floor space. And I think when I joined, there was 40 or 45 personal trainers. So it's a massive space with a lot of people there at the same time. And, everyone's sort of looking at what everyone else is doing out the corner of their eyes. And I think the thing that these trainers noticed about the way that I worked was that I was assessing a lot. So I was often testing people, getting them to do interesting assessments, which is, I think, immediately different to normal person training in terms of how it looks, because there's a lot. I always had the iPad out making notes and stuff like that. But there's a joke that people used to make about my clients is that they're part of the silly lunge club, because of all these strange exercises I'd get people to do to correct their movement. And they're called silly lunges, but there's always a very good reason behind why they might be throwing an arm over their head or reaching. There's one called ballet hands, where it looks like you're being a ballerina while you're lunging. So there's all these very unusual exercises, which are very atypical in a commercial gym environment. At least they were then. Now they're thankfully more widely spread. But that would pique people's curiosity. And I think in the commercial gym, that's no bad thing to have people asking questions like, what are they doing over there? Why are they doing that? It opens a conversation to then start driving people's awareness and appreciation of moving better. So, they're doing that because they've had this knee pain and we're trying to achieve this thing in their foot, and this is how we'll do it.
Yeah, great. I saw the Silly Lunge Club on your Instagram feed, and I was going to ask you about that today.
Yeah,
but I think that's a great concept, though, having it making it fun but with intention, so that there's a reason behind it. Isn't just a daft movement to try and attract people's attention. There's a reason why you do it, but having fun with it as well. It doesn't have to be super technical in terms of the way you describe it. I thought it was I saw it on your feed. I thought it was brilliant.
It's funny because the situations that have made me laugh most is that two of my clients will notice each other in the gym, and one of them will go over there, like, are you in Ash's Silly Lunge Club? And they usually are. So
in terms of personal training, we've had a few different people on in the past talking about assessments. Matt Dewhurst, who you know is one of them, and then we had Logan, who works with Dr. John Russin as well. What, in your opinion, are the things that personal trainers should be focusing on, especially early on when they're newly qualified, coming in and being able to assess their clients well, movement-wise? What can they start to do to get going with that? Because there's a lot there, I know, but what are the things you recommend early on?
I think for me, the fundamentals are joint positions and motions. So in the level 3 PT course, we always learn what every joint can do in all three planes of motion. But I think we quite often learn that side of anatomy and then forget about it and just focus on the normal gym movements. But I doubled down on that at the start of my mentorship, because that is the fundamental language with which we interpret movement. So if somebody's moving suboptimally, let's say, we need to be clear on how it's suboptimal. So if they've got a wonky squat, it's not enough to say it's a wonky squat. You need to actually categorize how it's wonky and and that's how we can do the detective work to understand what might be going on, because a wiggle in one direction will mean this muscle's tight or weak, a wiggle in the opposite direction or a rotation. All those nuances, we need to be able to describe them accurately before we can do anything about them. And I think for me, that's probably the first thing that we need to do as personal trainers, is just become very literate and articulate about describing movement. Because I think everyone can get a sense of when a movement doesn't quite look right, but we can only really fix it if we know how it's not right, and getting really good at saying, okay, there's too much hip adduction in that lunge, so now we can do something about that. That would be my number one tip.
Brilliant. And is that just through more learning and education on biomechanics, anatomy and physiology, just understanding the body, how it's connected?
So I think
those things.
Exactly. Well, I think most level 3 PT courses will go through each of the joints and describe their possible motions. But the way I would advise people go about it is getting clear with those, almost like drawing a table. This is one of the exercises I get them to in the mentorship. Draw a table listing out every possible joint motion for each of the major joints. So ankles, knees, hips, spine, and shoulders would be the starting point. Once you know what all the words are, then when you're training somebody or you're just looking at somebody move, just pick one joint and say, what's going on in that joint in all three planes of motion? So in a squat, you could say somebody's hip is flexed, adducted, and internally rotated. You're like, sweet, now I know what's going on with that one, and I can compare it to somebody else's where it might be flexed, abducted, and externally rotated, and then we can have a discussion about which one's better or worse for whatever their goal is.
So becoming fluent in the language is what you say, just getting better at articulating what's happening in the body and understanding that yourself.
Spot on. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Not heard that before, so that's a really good point.
Yeah. I think what's important about that as well is that if you can understand it to that level, I think often people learn the exercise rather than learn the movement. So they learn that to do a squat, I put my feet here and I put my hands here, but that's not a squat. The squat is the movement, and it's what position do you potentially need to be in to perform that movement well or more optimally. Or I think if you're learning that language and understanding it to that level, you're much better able to do that, not just for yourself, but obviously for everyone else that you're coaching.
Exactly.
I think that should be the standard. I think that should.
It is, yeah. That's exactly what I was about to say. I think as trainers, we are experts in getting people to move, so we should be able to describe how they're moving in a great level of detail. I think this raises an interesting discussion around what is a personal trainer for, because if it's just for getting somebody to look good, then it's a different discussion to getting them to move well. And I think as the industry's evolved and we've moved more towards function and making people fitter for life and doing all the things they want to do, that places a much bigger emphasis, rightly so, on the quality of movement that people have available to them, rather than just sticking them on all the bodybuilding machines for 3 sets of 10. We're now actually teaching them to squat well, because that's going to affect how they interact with the world in their normal life, which I think is where we should be going.
Yeah, and the byproduct of that is people look better anyway, eventually, because they're moving better. They'll be able to do exercises that will help them look better. So it's kind of all tied into one. 100%. But yeah, leading with that movement is a big shift that I've definitely seen happen. Is there anything, if that's what PT should be concentrating on early on, is there anything they should stay away from, in your opinion? Anything that they should really avoid?
I never really thought about that. I think, I guess a common pitfall is just jumping on trends. I think that probably wastes a lot of people's time and energy, in that they see something on Instagram and they think that's what they should be doing, but it's, a 15-second clip in somebody's story and they don't really know the context behind it. And so you see a lot of people chop and change between different programs, different methodologies, thinking that that's the secret sauce that they've been missing, when really just getting a good understanding of the fundamental principles means you can apply those principles to any new situation. And I think it's much better to, what's the saying, like go a mile deep and an inch wide than an inch deep and a mile wide. So you do need enough general knowledge to understand the context, but actually just getting lots and lots of reps doing the basics will serve you better than trying to learn one strange exercise which only applies in one context for one person. I think that the social media sort of quick hit style of content can waste a lot of people's time, unsurprisingly.
Yeah. That's really good advice. I want to talk now about, then I'm going to change the order of some of these topics we'd put down. What were your values coming into the industry? Because it sounds like you came from quite a different industry before you did this, which is something we didn't know. But what are the values that you have? Matt and I get a lot of grief for always talking about values because we think they're so important. But what values do you have personally, and how did you bring that into what you do with clients and tutoring as well?
I think, actually reflected on this when I was setting up the business, and one of them that's really important is integrity. So I think just doing everything in a transparent way. That I think fitness can have a bad reputation as people selling snake oil, or Liver King's a great example of that, in that he's low integrity for being deceitful in how he achieved his physique. So I think to try and buck that trend, just not over-promising, being very straightforward and honest with how things work. So somebody comes in with knee pain, you could sell products on the internet saying cure knee pain in a week or whatever it might be, and everyone knows that's disingenuous. And you probably could build a big business out of that, and some people maybe do. But I think it's a long-term better strategy to be more honest and to paint the picture of reality, to say this is going to require quite a lot of work from you. It's probably going to hurt for a little bit longer before it gets better. But this is how things work. This is why we're doing it in this way. And I think that's what's best for you overall. So I think that, for me, shows through in the coaching side of things when I'm helping somebody get over an injury, but also from the teaching point of view. My business used to be called Functional Movement Hacks, and I renamed it because I don't like the word hacks, because it suggests shortcut, it suggests cheat code.
Right.
And the reality of the training style, but also the education, is it does require a lot of work. So the mentorship is hard. There'll be times when your brain's melting and it's completely rewiring the way you think about movement. But that's because I think that's what's best long term. If you really get under the skin of it and you understand it in great detail, you and your clients will be better off long term. And I think it's better for everybody that I'm transparent about that, because I don't want people signing up because they want to learn 10 Instagram exercises that they can post and pretend that they're a movement specialist because they've got the cheat code to try and portray that image. So I think it basically means going a bit slower, but hopefully building better foundations for the future.
I think that's I really like that, because it was a good example of a value. And do you think maybe some of that integrity comes from, because you must have come from an industry where you were paid really well, by the sounds of it. If you were in finance, the likelihood was that the money was good, but you did something that you were passionate about and you were willing to take that longer road because you are passionate.
Yeah.
And I think if the personal trainers listening, it's that needs to be there when you start. You need to be willing to put work in because you're passionate, not because you think this is an industry full of money. I think you need to be coming in for the right reasons. But the second bit I loved in that was its integrity, but your small action of taking hack out of your marketing is a way to align with that value really well, so that you're going, I probably know this would bring me in more leads, more business, but I don't like it. It's not what I stand for, and I'm going to take it out.
Yeah,
I'm going to go the harder route around and get the right types of clients who I can actually help. So I wanted to people to hear the value, but also the action to align with that value was really strong.
And a lot of what Ash described in that as well is something we've spoke a lot about before, Paul, which is like just setting the expectations with people. Like you were saying, Ash, it's going to take a bit longer. It is going to be hard. It's not a quick fix. We've said that before, haven't we, Paul, about being open and honest and transparent with clients. And, that expectation setting is really important. I think people often get that wrong, regardless of what result they're trying to help people with. They don't deliver that very well, and then they come unstuck when the client doesn't get 3 stone weight loss in 2 weeks, or
exactly. You just become the boy who cried wolf, right?
That's
the way I think about it, is that it takes a long time to build trust, but not very long to lose it. So if you overpromise and underdeliver, then forevermore after that point, people question what you say, because they're like, oh, he's somebody who exaggerates for effect. So that means everything you say in the future comes with a pinch of salt. Whereas if you always back up what you say, then it's just easier, because you don't need to put layers or filters or translations on anything. It's just, you just say things as they are. So there's a nice, I can't remember if I stole this from somebody or I came up with myself, probably the former. But I think when you're looking at stuff like this, the question I like to ask is, what would the man I want to be do? So if there's an ethical dilemma, then you just think, okay, forget about this individual situation, but the person I aspire to be, how would they act in this specific scenario? And usually that means having a more difficult conversation than the dodge. But I think that's a nice tool to navigate life in general.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to go to this next, because this was actually one given to me by Matt Dewhurst. Said, is there anything you want to ask Ash? And he said, yeah. If there's one common misconception about movement you'd like to see changed, what would it be? And he put in brackets, I think he'll go on forever on this one.
Yeah.
So I think he might have lots to say.
Yeah.
Right, okay, let's go for that. So
That's why Paul's put it in now rather than near the end.
Yeah, exactly. How long have we got?
One common misconception about movement you like to see changed, what would it be?
So there's a few, but the main one that people like to prod me about is knees out and knees valgus in the squat.
Okay.
So I've been banging on about this for years, and actually recorded. It's one of the first podcasts we recorded because I've just had this conversation so many times with so many of my clients. I just wanted to have something that I could say, if you're interested in a long, detailed explanation, just listen to this podcast, because I haven't got half an hour now. But basically, for the longest time, I think the tide is turning now. We were coached to coach squatting by driving your knees out. Mm-hmm. And it's just not a good idea from all angles, essentially, from injury prevention or reduction, from performance, from muscle activation. It's just inferior to letting your knees go where they want, or even letting your knees go inwards, provided it's controlled, is the caveat. We don't want any radical, uncontrolled movements anywhere in the body. But it was essentially an overreaction to some research showing that ACL injuries happen in a position of knee valgus, which is true, but the context within which they happen is completely disregarded. So we basically compared people sprinting and changing direction, wearing studs on a single leg, with squatting a barbell, standing still, with much lower forces going through the knees. Right. And the logic was that ACL injuries happen in a position of knee valgus, so we should avoid knee valgus at all costs. When you can't avoid knee valgus, it happens every time you take a step. So my stance on it is, pun slightly intended, is basically let the knees go where they want, and you'll strengthen that position so that when you do go into knee valgus in sport or whatever, you have more strength and control there and are much less likely to damage your ACL. We can't just blacklist certain movements, especially if they occur naturally in sport and are more force generating. So we actually just need to teach the body to be okay and resilient in those positions. But yeah, that's one. The tide is turning. Like, you see more and more people posting about it now, so the right. knowledge is getting more widespread. And I think CrossFit have even updated their level 1 so that they don't cue knees out when teaching people to squat, which is nice to see. But that's probably the one that people expect me to say, so I've got to say it.
I think there'll be a lot of people listening to that with interest as well, who still do currently coach it the other way. Yeah. And if you're not sure what knee valgus means, see earlier point of learning the language about joint movement and being literate in that is really important. Yeah. But it basically means the knees dropping in. So, okay, that was great. Really good to listen to. Let's go next to, if you were starting your career again, is there anything that you would look back on and do differently? I know that's an awkward question for people sometimes, because kind of the mistakes you make get you to the next bit. But is there any advice you'd give to an earlier Ash starting out?
I think I don't regret anything, but what would I do differently? I think following your interests is really important. Everyone has different preferences in terms of the style of training they like to do and the types of people they like to work with. So just tuning into that rather than doing what everyone else expects of you, or doing what's hot in the industry, or doing what's lucrative right now. I think if you pursue those things, you'll probably get quite tired in the industry quite quickly. Most people get into fitness because it's their passion and they love it. And a lot of people turn it into as much of a grind as a 9-to-5 office job quite quickly, because they do what they have to do or what they should do rather than the stuff they actually enjoy about the industry. So it's another sort of long-term over short-term thing, in that if you do work in areas that you're interested in, your energy and enthusiasm is going to stay much higher for much longer than if you turn it into a grind. And this applies to all areas of the business, like even social media and stuff like that. you can set things up in a way that play to your strengths rather than, I've got to post every day. You end up hating posting because, you're just producing more shit that's already too much of it on social media, and you don't feel good about yourself because you're just playing somebody else's game. Whereas if you say you prefer blogging or you prefer podcasting, then you'll naturally stick with it and do it to a better level because you enjoy it. So I think that's, I think I probably went down a couple of paths for that and then course corrected because I realized that it just isn't my style. And again, like potentially if I got really big into social media, then my business might be in a better place than it is now, but I would feel like a sellout and I wouldn't be enjoying my day-to-day as much. So I think just being aware of that trade-off would be advice to myself when starting out. Just be conscious of it and make deliberate decisions around it.
I think that's really good advice. Matt and I still do mentoring with coaches now, more on the business, organization, sales side of things. But there's a lot of people who fall into those traps, especially with social media, that they end up doing too much on that side and actually forgetting what they enjoy doing and becoming upset with it and quite, disillusioned with the whole thing, and you have to guide them back to the things that they love doing without neglecting maybe the marketing side and some of the things you need to do. But I think that was perfect what you said. There's more than one way to do it. If you love podcasting, do that. If you love blogging, do that. If you love offline marketing, maybe you can do that. Like, there's lots of different ways to do it. So that was really good advice. Last question then. We're going to go through. I wanted to get an idea of your process, if that's all right. So what things you see clients come in with commonly, and then what's your process of working with somebody? And I was just thinking, just popped into my head there, should we do this as a personal trainer coming on one of your courses? Like, what do you see with personal trainers coming in, or a client, or both? So I'm going to leave it up to you.
Okay. So the first thing that popped to mind when you asked that question was process of working with a client, because I still do that, but it's also what I teach on the mentorship. And there's a tool that the mentees will be sick of me banging on about, we use at the training stimulus, called the spectrum of specificity. And basically it just means how close are we to what we want for that person or what they want. So whatever their goal is, the top of the spectrum of specificity is that goal. And the principle we have is that we should always work as close to that as we can, provided we're getting an effective training stimulus. So what that means in terms of a process is the first step is getting super clear on what that goal is. So the goal could be pain-free squatting. It could be losing X% of body fat or putting on X kilos of muscle. And we just need to be constantly aware of, are we moving that person towards that goal? And are we moving them towards it as effectively as we possibly could be? And as long as we keep checking in on that, we're doing the right thing. And the same would apply to education. So where do I want people to finish up when they finish the mentorship? I want them to be confident and competent in performing a muscle imbalance assessment. So is what I'm delivering today helping them move in that direction? If not, then cut it or change it. So for a personal trainer looking to work with a new client, the first thing is that consultation, really understanding why they're here. And for me, when it comes to biomechanics and movement mechanics, people often think from a problem point of view, where they're like, oh, my knee hurts. I would much rather focus on the destination. So, okay, I understand where you are today, but we need to get clear on where I'm moving you towards, because the way I would train you if you want to get ready for a marathon might be different if you want to compete at the Olympics in Olympic weightlifting. So once you've got where you are today and where you want to go in the future, our job is just plotting a journey from A to B in the most direct way possible. And I try to do that with everything, whether it's coaching or education, is laying a trail of breadcrumbs that very clearly people can see them moving towards what they want. And that helps with so much like buy-in. If you've got a CrossFitter and they just care about improving their 1 rep max squat, it can be a hard sell to get them to do some weird balance exercise. But if they can see that that will lead to being able to do a lunge, which leads to a squat, which leads to a pain-free squat, then they'll do it because it's anchored in their mind to the end goal that they're focused on. And it's the same for fat loss. If somebody hates doing running intervals, for example, but you've connected that to getting lean for their summer holiday in Ibiza, then it's much easier for them to push into the pain than avoid discomfort because they can't see how it's going to get them where they want to go. So that I love that for the spectrum of specificity, just makes that decision-making process much clearer in our minds for every decision, whether it's exercise selection, sets and reps, rest, all that sort of stuff. We're like, where are we trying to get them long-term? And is this decision moving us towards it in the best way that we know how?
Good. Yeah, that's great. Really nice and simple, and easy to start to communicate with clients as well. Like you said, that we're doing this exercise, which some people will go, well, why am I stood on one leg doing a balance exercise? Because we're trying to get to here, and this is the route that we're taking. And it makes people do it with a lot more passion. Yeah, great.
I'd just be interested to know on your process there, Ash, because I think something trainers do struggle with, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this, is that when they start with the client, they've got this excitement, we've got this journey to go on. I know what the journey looks like. And I think sometimes when they then throw that person into the mix of all the other people they're helping, they lose the way a little bit. Like, where we up to in this journey now? Where were we meant to be again? And me and Paul recommend doing regular reviews with clients and things like that, and reassessments and stuff. And I was just wondering to what degree you do that. Do you have like set processes for making sure that people remain on track, or what have you found that tends to work well for you and the trainers that you mentor?
Yes, great question. So I think the key here is having regular objective check-ins. So you've got to agree with your client or your student what the outcome you're both working towards is. And this, I think, is most true in the training scenario, where at the start you might agree on a set of goals with somebody, and then along the way they're saying that they don't feel like they're getting what they want. But you're like, well, you said you want this, and I can show you data that you're getting that. Like, say the classic one would be, I want to get stronger, when they actually mean they want to lose weight. And you 4, 6, 8 weeks go by and all their numbers are up, they're moving really well, their strength has gone through the roof, but they haven't lost any weight. And what that boiled down to is that they weren't honest about what they wanted up front. So hopefully you can nip that in the bud in the initial conversation. Just give them some easy openings conversationally to say, actually, I'd also like to lean up a little bit. But if you haven't had that conversation, then you need to address it when it pops up. Say, okay, well, first time we talked, we said we're going to get stronger, but what I'm hearing is that I think you want to have a bit of an aesthetic focus as well. So we're going to add in a weigh-in or a body fat scan into our regular check-in to make sure we're tracking towards that goal, because we've realized that that's more important to you than we previously thought. So I think that's clear cut with stuff that's numerical. So whether it's measurements or weight on the bar, it gets more difficult with movement quality. So how do you demonstrate to somebody that they're moving better? And pain can be really useful in this scenario because you can go from painful to pain-free, but that is a spectrum. So a lot of people will use pain out of 10, and if it's going down, it's going in the right direction, so that's happy days. But something I like to use from a movement mechanics perspective is to pick some tests. So on that spectrum of specificity, we can design sub movements that test a specific movement quality. So if we've identified their knee pain is related to their hip stability, and we maybe have pinned that down to hip stability in the frontal plane, so going side to side, we could do a balance exercise where they have to shift their hips to the side and film it. And if it's bad, they'll be all over the place. They won't have any control. They might lose balance. Then we can check in on that exercise in a few weeks' time. If they've done their homework, it will be better. And if they haven't, it won't. So we can demonstrate through a qualitative exercise that their movement is getting better, and provided it's close enough to the thing that they want to be able to do, say squat or lunge pain-free, they should be able to connect the dots that this sub-exercise improving links to my end goal of squatting pain-free. So I think that's important for follow-up appointments and helping the client to understand why they're doing it. It's like, okay, I need to do this exercise because my hips are unstable going sideways, and that's going to help me control my knee when I run or squat. And then you can demonstrate in the check-in that things have got better, even if they're not quite pain-free at that point.
Yeah. And most importantly, it keeps ash off the back if they've done it. So that's
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, that was good to hear. That was good to hear that process. And hopefully that'll give people ideas for how they might want to sort of individualize that check-in and review process. Because again, you can have a generalized process for doing these things, but there has to be that extra portion of individualization as well, especially with these types of goals.
Yeah, I think it's like chunking is the way I like to think about it. It's like, you're here and we want to get you here. Then how do we break that up into small chunks, which bridge the gap? And I think that's probably the rehab process has the most room for improvement, because most people, they'll do really basic rehab exercises that might get them out of pain or restore some really basic movement options, but there's still a huge gap between where they are and where they want to be. If they want to, snatch 100 kilos or do 30 pull-ups unbroken, whatever it might be, just because they've got this small amount of shoulder movement recovered, it doesn't mean they're able to do the end movement. And this is one of the ways I think CrossFit is brilliant, is their scaling options, in that they have so many ways to break down the top end, say a muscle up. There's so many drills that you can put in to work on individual components of that muscle up end skill. So if we can identify some prerequisites of, you need to be able to do, say it's a strict muscle up, you need to be able to do a dead hang in false grip for this amount of time. You need to be able to do this many false grip ring pull-ups. You need to be able to do this many strict ring dips from deep. If you can chunk up the end goal into those mini goals, then you can see that journey out in front of you and how it's all building up to what you really want. Versus some people will just be like, I can do a pull-up, I want to do a muscle up. And then they're just annoyed that they can't do it. They keep trying to do a muscle up, but they can't. But as we know about skill acquisition, we need to control those variables and break it down into bite-sized pieces so we can keep making progress, no matter how small.
That's awesome. Ash, we really appreciate your time today, because we know you're a busy person. And we'll look forward to seeing you very soon when you're over in the UK doing a course for us. I know all the guys are really excited for that as well. But before we go, let's tell everybody where they can find you, what handles you've got, where they can find your courses, everything. Brilliant.
Thank you for having me, first of all. Really enjoyed that. And yeah, can't wait to come up north to visit you guys. Where to find me, thetrainingstimulus.com is the home of the company. And there's a free download for anybody interested in movement mechanics, which I must mention. And socials, my name is ashgrossman.coach with a double N. And you can find all my links on there. I also co-host a podcast called Lunge and Lift, where we deep dive into a lot of these topics. There's one on knee valgus and movement quality and efficiency, all sorts of things. So have a scan through the archives there, and hopefully the trainers will find some useful information too. And I think that's it, apart from my personal phone number.
You don't need to give that one out.
Yeah. We'll make sure that everything's tagged anyway. You'll get bombarded with tags from us as this goes out. So yeah, hopefully everyone will find you easy enough.
Thank you.
Right, thanks, Ash, and we'll see everybody next week on the ProFit podcast.